Robert Baratheon had always been a man of war, not of whispers, but even a war-hardened king grew tired of lies. After years on the Iron Throne, surrounded by flatterers and snakes, Robert found himself looking for something real. And somehow, in the cold halls of Winterfell, he found it. Not in Ned, not in Catelyn, but in Jon Snow. It was strange. Jon was a bastard, yes, but there was something about the boy. Quiet, sharp, watchful. He didn't flatter the king, didn't even try to impress him. Maybe that's what made Robert curious. Maybe that's what made him listen. Their first real conversation happened the night of the feast. The great hall roared with laughter and music, but Robert had grown bored of it. He had already drunk too much wine and wanted some air. On his way out, he saw Jon outside, alone in the courtyard, practicing with a wooden sword like no one was watching. "What are you doing out here, boy?" Robert slurred. Jon froze, clearly not expecting the king. "Training, Your Grace." Robert chuckled. "Training in the dark? You trying to fight shadows?" "No, Your Grace," Jon said. "Just trying to be better." Robert paused. That answer, it wasn't foolish. It wasn't proud. Just honest. "Better than who?" Robert asked. "Better than who I was yesterday." That made the king laugh, deep and loud, and for the first time in a long time he wasn't laughing at someone, he was laughing with someone. That night, Robert sat with Jon for hours. They spoke about honor, about war, about duty. Jon asked real questions, not about gold or titles, but about what it meant to lead, to be king, to live with regret. And Robert, drunk, tired, and perhaps a little broken, answered truthfully, more truthfully than he had in years. When he left Winterfell, he looked at Jon differently. There was something in that boy. Not just a Stark, not just a bastard, something else. By the time they reached King's Landing, Robert couldn't stop thinking about it. Cersei noticed his mood had changed. He barely touched her, didn't laugh at her biting jokes, didn't drink as much. He even ignored Jaime when he tried to talk strategy. Varys whispered to Littlefinger, "The king is distracted." But it wasn't distraction. It was clarity. 2 moons after leaving Winterfell, Robert called for Jon to be brought to King's Landing officially as a squire, but privately as something else. Ned was surprised, Catelyn furious. But Jon said nothing. He only bowed and prepared to leave. At the Red Keep, Jon saw the truth faster than most. The gold cloaks were loyal to coin, not the crown. The small council was a pit of snakes, and the Lannisters always watching, always whispering. Robert noticed how Jon never trusted them, how he always kept a hand on the truth, even when it was dangerous. Slowly, Robert began to lean on Jon for advice more than he ever did with Jaime or Cersei, even more than Ned sometimes, because Jon didn't speak from pride. He spoke from what was right, and that made him dangerous. Cersei warned Robert, "The bastard is filling your ears with Stark poison." Robert snapped, "He's the only one not lying to me." And from that day a line was drawn. Jon's presence grew. Robert trusted him with more tasks, watching over Joffrey, sitting in on small meetings, even helping oversee the city watch. The Lannisters fumed. Varys watched closely. And Ned worried, because while Jon was doing good, he was walking on swords. One night, Robert invited Jon to his chamber alone. "No guards, no wine. I want to ask you something," Robert said. "Yes, Your Grace. Why do you think the realm is rotting?" Jon didn't flinch. "Because the people in charge are feeding it poison." Robert leaned back. "And who would you trust to heal it?" Jon was quiet. "Then someone who doesn't want the power." The king stared at him, and in that moment, something shifted forever. Robert Baratheon began to wonder if this bastard, this quiet boy from the north, had been born a true-born prince. Would he have made a better king? And in the shadows of the Red Keep, the Lannisters began to prepare for war, not with swords and fire, but with secrets, whispers, and knives in the dark. Jon Snow didn't know it yet, but he had become a threat to the most dangerous family in Westeros, and they never let threats live long. The whispers started slowly, like wind moving through dry leaves. At first, Jon did not notice. He was too busy learning the rhythm of King's Landing, the smell of the streets, the hunger in the eyes of the poor, the greed hidden behind silk curtains in the Red Keep. But others noticed him. The guards began to respect him, not because he was close to the king, but because he trained with them. He listened to them, he remembered their names. When he walked through Flea Bottom with the city watch, he did not cover his nose like the nobles did. He looked people in the eye, and word reached Robert. One afternoon, Sir Barristan Selmy approached the king quietly. "Your Grace," he said, "the boy has courage." Robert grinned. "I know. He also has loyalty." Robert's smile faded slightly. Loyalty was a rare thing in King's Landing. That same evening, Cersei called Jaime to her chambers. "He is turning Robert against us," she said coldly. Jaime leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "He's a boy." "He's a Stark," she snapped. "And worse, he is honest." Jaime smirked. "Honesty is honest." Jaime smirked. "Honesty doesn't win thrones." Cersei's eyes hardened. "No, but it wins trust." And that was far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Jon began noticing things. He saw how Joffrey bullied servants when no one watched, how gold disappeared from treasury records, how certain guards were replaced without explanation. One night, while reviewing City Watch reports, Jon found something strange. Several patrol routes had been changed routes near the docks and certain warehouses owned by Lannister allies. He brought it to Robert. The king listened carefully. Not drunk, not laughing. "Are you accusing my Hand's Council?" Robert asked. "I am saying someone is using your name for their own gain," Jon replied calmly. Robert stood and walked to the window. "For years I thought I was blind because I drank too much," he muttered. "Now I see I was blind because I trusted the wrong people." The next morning, Robert surprised everyone. He dismissed 3 minor officials tied to Lannister trade, publicly, without consulting Cersei. The court exploded with gossip. Cersei did not scream, she did not cry, she smiled. And that terrified Varys more than anything. That night, Varys visited Jon privately. "The game you are stepping into, my lord," Varys said softly, "is not played with honor." "I am no lord," Jon replied. "No," Varys agreed, "but you have the king's ear. That is far more powerful." Jon studied him. "Are you warning me?" "I am advising you," Varys corrected gently. "Trust is a fragile sword. When it breaks, it cuts both ways." Jon did not sleep well that night. The next blow came faster than anyone expected. During a royal hunt, Robert was separated from his main guard. A boar charged him massive, furious, but this time Robert was not drunk. Jon had insisted on riding beside him. Something felt wrong that morning. The wine served at breakfast had been stronger than usual. Jon had quietly knocked Robert's cup aside and replaced it before anyone noticed. When the boar attacked, Jon reacted first. He drove his spear deep into the beast's neck, throwing himself between the animal and the king. The boar still struck Robert, knocking him to the ground, but the wound was shallow. The forest went silent. Robert, breathing heavily, stared at Jon standing over him, covered in blood, not his own. "You saved me," Robert said slowly. Jon extended his hand. "I serve the realm." On the ride back, Robert said nothing. But when they returned to King's Landing, he called an emergency council meeting. In front of everyone, Cersei, Jaime, Varys, Littlefinger Robert made an announcement. "From this day forward," he declared, "Jon Snow will serve as my personal advisor." His voice will be heard in all matters concerning the crown." The room froze. Cersei's fingers tightened on her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Littlefinger's smile faded just a little. Jaime's hand rested lightly on his sword, and Ned Stark, standing at the far end of the hall, felt both pride and fear mix in his chest. Because this was no longer about a bastard finding his place. This was about power shifting. And in King's Landing, when power shifts, blood follows. That night, as Jon stood alone on the balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, a hooded figure watched him from the shadows. A silent crossbow was raised, a breath was held. But before the trigger could be pulled, another blade flashed in the dark, and the assassin fell without a sound. Jon turned, startled. From the shadows stepped Ser Barristan Selmy. "You are making enemies quickly," the old knight said quietly. Jon looked down at the dead man. "I suppose I am." Barristan's eyes were serious, and they will not miss twice. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei poured herself wine, her face calm as still water. "If the wolf wants to play lion," she whispered softly, "then we will show him how lions hunt." The real war had begun. The body of the assassin was gone before sunrise. No one officially knew about it. No announcement, no investigation. In King's Landing, some deaths were simply erased. But Jon knew. Ser Barristan had taken him straight to Robert that same night. The king had listened in silence as the old knight explained what happened. There was no wine in Robert's hand this time, no laughter in his eyes. "Inside the Red Keep," Robert growled, "they dare send killers into my own castle." Jon spoke calmly. This was not random. Someone is afraid. Robert slammed his fist against the table. Let them be afraid. But deep down, Robert understood something now. This was not just politics. This was survival. The next morning, Robert made another unexpected move. He ordered the Gold Cloaks reorganized. Half of their captains were replaced. Men known to be loyal to Lannister gold, quietly dismissed. In their place, Robert promoted soldiers who had served in the rebellion. Hard men, loyal men. The Lannisters were losing ground. Cersei confronted Robert in private. "You humiliate my family in front of the court," she said coldly. Robert didn't shout. That was what surprised her most. "I am protecting my throne from your own queen." Robert looked at her for a long moment. "From anyone who thinks it belongs to them." For the first time in years, Cersei felt something close to uncertainty. Meanwhile, Jon began digging deeper. If someone had tried to kill him, they had made a mistake. They had shown fear. And fear leaves traces. With quiet help from Varys, who claimed to serve the realm, above all, Jon discovered something disturbing. The crossbow used by the assassin came from a shipment meant for Casterly Rock. It had been redirected through the city docks under false records. Someone powerful had arranged it. Jon stood in the small council chamber later that week, presenting the information carefully. He did not accuse, he did not name, but everyone understood. Littlefinger smiled thinly. "Interesting coincidence." Jaime's green eyes burned. "Are you suggesting my family sends hired knives now?" Jon met his gaze without fear. "I am suggesting that the king deserves loyalty." The silence was heavy. Robert leaned forward. "And I will have it." That night another shock spread through the Red Keep. Robert dismissed Lord Tywin Lannister as warden of the West temporarily, he claimed, pending investigation into financial irregularities. It was not a full accusation, but it was a warning. The court split instantly. Some lords began drifting closer to Jon, sensing the wind changing. Others tightened their loyalty to the Lions of Lannister. The realm was dividing, and then came the final spark. Joffrey. The young prince had never liked Jon. He felt threatened by him, though he did not fully understand why. One afternoon, during sword training, Joffrey lost his temper after being disarmed. "You are nothing," Joffrey shouted. "Just a bastard playing at honor." Jon lowered his blade slowly, and you are the future king." The words stung more than any insult. That evening, Joffrey ran to Cersei, furious. "Father cares more about him than me." Cersei held her son's face gently. "Your father is weak. He listens to wolves because he has forgotten what lions are." "What should we do?" Joffrey asked. Cersei's voice was soft. "We remind him." 2 days later, chaos erupted in the city. A riot broke out in Flea Bottom. Bread stores burned. Gold cloaks were attacked. Rumors spread that the crown was raising taxes again, that the Starks were stealing food, that the king had gone mad. It was all lies, but lies move faster than truth. Jon rushed through the streets with the city watch, trying to calm people, to restore order. He saw something: strange men inciting violence who did not look hungry, well-fed, armed, organized. This was not desperation, it was planned. By nightfall, fires lit half the district. Smoke choked the sky. Robert stood on the walls of the Red Keep, watching his city burn. "They want me to look weak," he muttered. Jon stood beside him. "Then don't be." Robert turned to him slowly. "If I move against the Lannisters openly, the realm could split." Jon didn't hesitate. "If you don't move, you are already divided." The king stared at the flames below. For years, Robert Baratheon had ignored the game. He drank while others plotted, laughed while others gathered power. But not anymore. That same night, Robert ordered the arrest of several wealthy merchants tied to Lannister trade. Their accounts were seized, their ships blocked from leaving port. Cersei did not scream this time. She went silent, and silence from Cersei Lannister was more dangerous than fury. In the quiet of her chambers, she met with Jaime. "It is time," she said softly. "For what?" Jaime asked. "For the truth to die." Across the castle, unaware of the storm building, Jon received a message sealed with a golden lion. It contained only 3 words: "You are mistaken." Jon folded the letter slowly. Outside his window, thunder rolled across the sky. The lions were done whispering, and soon they would roar. The storm did not wait for morning. Before sunrise, the Red Keep was already awake with tension. Guards moved in pairs instead of alone. Servants whispered instead of speaking freely. The air felt heavy, like something terrible was about to happen. Jon stood in the training yard, finishing his morning drills, when Ser Barristan approached him again. "You should not walk alone today," the old knight said quietly. Jon wiped sweat from his brow. "Because of the riot?" Barristan shook his head slightly. "Because fear makes desperate men brave." Jon understood. The Lannisters had been pushed into a corner. Powerful families did not forgive humiliation. They crushed it. Inside the castle, Robert called for a private meeting. Only 3 people were allowed inside: Jon, Ned Stark, and Varys. Robert looked different, harder. The softness that wine once gave him was gone. "I've received word from Casterly Rock," Robert said. "Tywin is gathering men." Ned's face darkened. "That is close to treason." "It is treason," Robert replied coldly. Jon stayed quiet for a moment, thinking carefully before speaking. "If Lord Tywin moves openly, he will claim he is protecting his daughter and grandson." Robert's jaw tightened. "My grandson." The room went silent. Varys watched closely, his eyes sharp. Jon stepped forward carefully. "Your Grace, rumors are spreading about Prince Joffrey." Robert's voice became dangerously low. "What rumors?" Jon met Ned's eyes for a brief second. Ned looked uneasy but said nothing. "They say," Jon continued slowly, "that Joffrey does not resemble you, that his hair, his temper, his cruelty, they match someone else." The words hung in the air like poison. Robert stood up so fast, his chair crashed behind him. "Say it." Jon did not flinch. "They say he is Jaime Lannister's son." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Robert's breathing grew louder. His fists trembled. Ned stepped forward. "Your Grace, we have not confirmed this." But Robert raised his hand. "Leave us." Ned and Varys hesitated. Now. They obeyed. Only Jon and Robert remained. For a long time, the king said nothing. He walked to the window, staring out over the city he had conquered years ago. "If this is true," Robert whispered, "then I have been a fool." Jon spoke carefully. "If it is true, then you were betrayed." Robert turned sharply. "And you? Why tell me this?" "Because you asked me once why the realm is rotting," Jon replied. "This is the poison." Robert's face twisted between rage and pain. "If Cersei has lied to me, if those children are not mine," he couldn't finish the sentence. Jon stepped closer. "Then you must act carefully, not with anger, with proof." Robert laughed bitterly. "Proof? The realm will drown in blood before proof is found." Jon's voice stayed calm. "Then we find it before the lions move." That same day, Robert secretly ordered an investigation into the royal lineage records. Old books were brought from the vaults, records of Baratheon bloodlines stretching back centuries. The pattern was clear. Black hair. Always black, never gold. Robert's hand shook as he turned the pages. By evening, the truth was no longer a rumor. It was a blade. Meanwhile, Cersei sensed the shift. Jaime entered her chambers quietly. "The king is digging," he said. Cersei's green eyes narrowed. "How far?" "Far enough." For the first time, there was no arrogance in Jaime's voice. Cersei stood slowly. "Then we move first." Across the castle, Joffrey sat alone, unaware that his world was about to collapse. He had heard whispers, seen the looks from guards, felt his father's cold distance. Fear was beginning to creep into his heart. That night, Robert summoned Cersei privately. No witnesses, no guards inside. Jon waited outside the chamber doors, hand resting on his sword, heart pounding. Voices rose inside, angry, sharp, then a loud crash. The doors burst open. Cersei stepped out, face pale but proud. Robert followed, his expression no longer confused. It was decided. The king's voice echoed through the hall. "Until further notice, Queen Cersei and her children are confined to their chambers." Gasps filled the corridor. Jaime reached for his sword instinctively, but dozens of royal guards surrounded him. Robert's eyes burned with fury. "Try it." Jaime slowly lowered his hand. Jon watched everything carefully. This was the point of no return. The lions had been caged. But caged lions are the most dangerous of all. As Cersei was escorted away, she locked eyes with Jon. There was no fear in her gaze, only promise. "You have no idea what you've started," she said softly. Jon held her stare. "I do." But deep inside, even he knew this was bigger than any of them. Tywin Lannister would not accept this quietly. War was no longer a possibility. It was coming. And when it came, it would not be fought in whispers. It would be fought in fire and blood. The Red Keep felt different after Cersei and her children were confined. The air was tighter, like every breath carried risk. Guards stood straighter. Servants kept their heads down. No one knew who would fall next. But outside the castle walls, the real storm was rising. Ravens began arriving from the Westerlands, reports of banners being called, Lannister soldiers gathering near the borders, castles strengthening their gates. Tywin Lannister was preparing for war. Robert stood in the war chamber staring at the painted map of Westeros. His large hand rested over the Westerlands. "He thinks I won't move against him," Robert said quietly. "He believes I'm still the drunk fool." Jon stood beside him. "Then surprise him." Robert looked at him, studying his face. "You speak like a man twice your age." "I grew up learning to watch," Jon replied. "Not to speak." Robert almost smiled. "You should have been my son." The words were heavy. For a second, something passed between them. A strange feeling, almost like fate laughing in the shadows, but there was no time for that. Ned Stark entered the chamber. "The Riverlands are nervous," he said. "If Tywin marches, they will be first to burn." Robert cursed under his breath. "Then we call our banners first." Within hours, ravens flew north to Winterfell, to the Vale, to Storm's End. The king was calling his loyal lords. For the first time since the rebellion, Robert Baratheon was preparing for real war. Meanwhile, in her guarded chamber, Cersei remained calm, too calm. She sat near the window, brushing Myrcella's hair gently, whispering soft words to Tommen. Joffrey paced like a trapped animal. "They will not keep us here," Joffrey said angrily. "I am the prince." Cersei turned to him slowly. "No, my son, you are something more important." "What?" "You are a spark." Joffrey frowned, not understanding. Across the castle, Jaime Lannister was not confined. Robert had spared him immediate arrest to avoid provoking open bloodshed inside the walls. But Jaime was watched at all times, and Jaime did not like being watched. Late that night, he slipped past two guards using an old secret passage he had known since childhood. The Lannisters had always known the hidden ways of the Red Keep. He entered Cersei's chamber quietly. Cersei did not look surprised. "It is time," Jaime whispered. She nodded. "Tywin is moving. We must weaken Robert before the armies clash. And the bastard." Her eyes hardened. "He dies first." Back in his quarters, Jon sat reading reports by candlelight when he heard a faint noise outside his door. Not loud, just a shift of weight. His hand went to his sword instantly. The door opened slowly. A young servant girl stumbled inside, bleeding from her arm. "They made me," she whispered, terrified. "They made me bring the wine." Jon's eyes widened. He rushed to the table. The wine pitcher sat untouched. Carefully, he sniffed it. Bitter almonds. Poison. Before he could react further, the torches in the hallway suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Footsteps rushed toward his room. Jon moved fast. He overturned the table, blocking the entrance just as the door burst open. A masked figure lunged forward with a dagger. Steel clashed in the dark. Jon fought blind, relying on instinct. The assassin was skilled, quick, silent, deadly. But Jon had grown up training in the north. He did not panic. He waited, listened, then struck. His blade found flesh. The attacker fell, but more footsteps echoed behind. Jon grabbed the injured servant and escaped through the side balcony, climbing down onto a lower roof as shouts filled the corridor. The Red Keep had turned into a battlefield. Guards loyal to Robert clashed with unknown attackers inside the halls. Confusion spread. No one knew who to trust. Robert stormed from his chambers half-armored, fury in his eyes. "Who dares?" Sir Barristan fought beside him, cutting down two men wearing Lannister colors beneath their cloaks. "It's a coup," Barristan said grimly. Robert roared like the warrior he once was. "Then let them face me." In the chaos, Jaime moved like a shadow toward the throne room. If Robert died tonight, Tywin's army would not be invading a kingdom, they would be reclaiming it. Jon, breathless and blooded, reached the throne hall just as Jaime stepped through the doors. The two locked eyes across the long chamber. Jaime smiled faintly. "You should have stayed in Winterfell, boy." Jon raised his sword. "You should have stayed loyal." Steel rang as they clashed in front of the Iron Throne. Jaime was faster, more experienced. Every strike was precise. Jon barely held his ground. "You think honor wins wars," Jaime taunted. "No," Jon replied through clenched teeth, "but truth does." Their blades locked. Suddenly the massive doors behind them burst open. Robert Baratheon entered, warhammer in hand, fury blazing. Jaime stepped back slowly. The hall fell silent except for heavy breathing. Robert looked at Jaime with betrayal deeper than any wound. "You," Robert said quietly. Jaime did not deny it. For a moment it seemed the king would crush him where he stood. But horns echoed from outside the city walls, long, deep, numerous. Jon turned toward the sound. Torches lit the distant hills. An army had arrived, too fast, too organized. Tywin Lannister was at the gates of King's Landing, and the real war had just begun. The horns outside the walls did not stop. They echoed through the night like a warning from the gods themselves. From the towers of the Red Keep, flames could be seen stretching across the hills. Thousands of torches, thousands of soldiers. Tywin Lannister had not come quietly. Inside the throne room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Jaime stood a few steps away from Robert, sword still in hand. Jon was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder, but refused to lower his blade. Robert's eyes moved from Jaime to the distant lights beyond the windows. "So," Robert said slowly, voice heavy with anger, "the lion shows his teeth." Jaime spoke calmly, even now. "You forced his hand." Robert laughed bitterly. "No, I forced him into the light." Guards surrounded Jaime at last. Dozens of swords pointed at him. This time, he did not resist. "Put him in chains," Robert ordered. "If his father wants war, he can watch it begin with his golden son in a cell." Jaime's jaw tightened, but he allowed himself to be taken. Jon stepped closer to Robert. "We must prepare the city. If Tywin storms the gates before dawn—" "He won't," Robert interrupted. "Tywin doesn't waste men on blind attacks. He will wait. He will starve us. He will make the city turn on me." Jon knew he was right. King's Landing was not loyal. It was afraid. And fear changed sides quickly. By sunrise, the city was surrounded. Lannister banners, red and gold, covered the hills like blood spilled across green grass. Siege towers were already being built. Supply lines secured. Tywin had planned this carefully. From the battlements, Jon watched the enemy camp form perfect rows. Discipline, order, power. Beside him stood Ned Stark, face grim. "This will not end without thousands dead," Ned said quietly. Jon's voice was steady. "Then we ended before that." Ned looked at him. "How?" Jon's mind was racing. Tywin wanted a long siege. He wanted hunger and doubt to weaken the king. So Jon proposed something bold. "We strike first." Within hours, Jon stood before Robert in the war chamber again. "You want to open the gates?" Robert asked, almost smiling at the madness of it. "Yes," Jon said, "but not for a full attack, a targeted strike. Burn their supply wagons, break their food lines, force them to fight hungry." Robert's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't in years. "Now, that sounds like war." Barristan hesitated. "It's risky." "All war is risky," Robert replied. That afternoon, as Tywin's men settled into what they believed would be a long siege, the gates of King's Landing suddenly opened. A small force charged out. At their front rode Robert Baratheon himself, warhammer raised high. Beside him rode Jon Snow. The Lannister soldiers scrambled, surprised. They had expected fear, not fury. Jon led a group of riders straight toward the supply wagons near the rear. Arrows flew past him. One grazed his arm. He didn't slow down. They reached the wagons. Fire spread quickly. Smoke rose high into the sky. Robert smashed through enemy lines like the warrior of old, crushing armor and bone alike. For a moment, it felt like the rebellion again. But Tywin Lannister was no fool. Hidden reserves emerged from behind the hills, cutting off the retreat path. Jon saw it first. "Trap!" he shouted. Lannister cavalry closed in from both sides. The attack had succeeded, but now they were surrounded. Robert laughed wildly, even as danger closed in. "Good. I was getting bored." Jon fought hard, cutting down 2 soldiers who came too close. But the numbers were overwhelming. Then, something unexpected happened. From the northern road, a new banner appeared, a dire wolf. The Stark army had arrived. Ned's call had been answered faster than Tywin expected. Northern soldiers crashed into the Lannister flank, breaking their formation. Confusion spread through Tywin's ranks. Jon felt a surge of hope. The trap reversed. Robert and his men fought their way back toward the gates, covered by Stark shields. By nightfall, both armies had pulled back. The field between them was littered with bodies. The message was clear. This would not be a simple siege. Inside his command tent, Tywin Lannister listened to reports calmly. "Jaime is captured," a messenger said. Tywin's expression did not change. "And the king leads from the front," another added. Tywin finally spoke. "Good." The commanders looked confused. "War reveals truth," Tywin continued, "and truth divides men." He turned toward the distant city lights. "Send word to High Garden, to Dawn, to anyone who doubts Baratheon's strength. Tell them the king protects a bastard over his own blood." A political war was beginning alongside the swords. Back inside King's Landing, Jon stood alone again on the walls, watching fires burn across the battlefield. Robert approached him quietly. "You saved my life twice now," Robert said. Jon shook his head. "You saved it yourself." Robert looked at him carefully. "If I fall in this war, the realm will need someone strong." Jon didn't like where this was going. "I am no king," he said firmly. Robert's eyes held something deep, something almost knowing. "No," Robert replied softly, "but you are something more dangerous. Far below, hidden among the chaos of war and politics, a raven flew south with a secret message sealed in gold. Not to Tywin, not to a lord, but to someone across the narrow sea. And when that message was opened, it would change everything." The raven flew across the narrow sea for days before reaching its destination. In the hot golden city of Pentos, a young woman with silver-gold hair stood on a balcony, staring at the horizon. The wind moved gently through her hair as the raven landed beside her. Daenerys Targaryen had known hunger, fear, exile. But she had also known one thing her enemies feared: fire. She opened the message slowly. The seal was gold, pressed with a lion. Her violet eyes scanned the words carefully. "Robert Baratheon weakens, the realm divided. The lion and the stag bleed each other. Westeros ripe for return." Her heart beat faster. For years she had lived in the shadow of her family's fall. The Mad King's daughter, the last dragon. Now the throne that had been stolen from her father was shaking. She folded the letter quietly. "Prepare the ships," she said softly. Back in Westeros, war tightened its grip. Tywin Lannister had changed tactics. Instead of direct assaults, he spread rumors through the camps and the city. "Robert hides behind a bastard. The king has no true heir. The realm will fracture." Food prices in King's Landing began rising. Fear returned to the streets. Inside the Red Keep, tension grew worse. Cersei remained confined but not silent. She had loyal servants still, loyal guards, loyal whispers. One night, a guard outside her chamber was found dead. No noise, no struggle. And by morning, Cersei and her children were gone. The castle erupted into chaos. Robert was furious. "Find them," he roared. But Jon already knew. "They're heading for Tywin's camp," he said. Robert looked at him sharply. "Then we ride." "No," Jon replied firmly. "That's what she wants." Robert paused. "If you charge blindly now," Jon continued, "Tywin will crush us in open field. He has the numbers." Robert's fists clenched. "She took my city's peace, my name, my throne." Jon stepped closer. "Then take her power instead." That night, Jon made a bold decision. He slipped out of the city with a small group of northern scouts, not toward Tywin's main camp but around it. He had studied the terrain carefully. There was a narrow pass near the river where Tywin's supply reinforcements were traveling from the west. If they could cut that line completely, the Lannister army would weaken fast. As they moved through the dark woods, Jon felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before. This was no longer about proving himself. This was about survival of the realm. Near dawn, they reached the river pass. Dozens of Lannister wagons moved slowly along the muddy path, guarded but not heavily. Tywin believed his main force was enough protection. Jon raised his hand. Arrows flew silently from the trees. Chaos erupted. Northern soldiers attacked quickly and fiercely. Jon fought at the front, moving like a shadow between enemies. Within minutes, the wagons were burning. The river reflected flames into the pale morning sky. But just as victory seemed certain, heavy cavalry thundered from behind. Tywin had anticipated this move. Jon realized the truth too late. He had walked into a counter-trap. The northern scouts were outnumbered. One by one, they fell. Jon fought desperately, cutting down a knight who nearly unhorsed him. His sword arm burned with exhaustion. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Well played, bastard." Tywin Lannister himself rode forward, calm and controlled, even in battle. "You have courage," Tywin said. "But courage without legacy is just noise." Jon's breath was heavy. Blood ran down his sleeve. "You hide behind gold," Jon replied. "I stand with men." Tywin's expression did not change. Men follow power. Before Jon could react, a heavy blow struck him from behind. The world went black. When he woke, his hands were chained. He was inside a Lannister war tent. Tywin sat across from him, watching quietly. "You have the king's trust," Tywin said, "more than his own blood." Jon stayed silent. Tywin leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, does he know what you truly are?" Jon's heart skipped for a second. Tywin's eyes sharpened. "Oh yes," Tywin said softly. "There are whispers older than this war. Whispers about your mother." Jon's chains rattled as he shifted. "You know nothing." Tywin smiled faintly. "I know enough." Tywin smiled faintly. "I know enough." Outside, battle horns sounded again. But these were not Lannister horns. They were unfamiliar. Tywin's calm expression finally flickered. A soldier rushed into the tent. "My lord's ships in Blackwater Bay, hundreds, flying a three-headed dragon." Silence filled the tent. Tywin stood slowly. "So," he murmured, "the past returns." Jon's chains felt suddenly lighter. Across the bay, black sails moved like shadows over the water, and at the front of the largest ship stood Daenerys Targaryen. The Dragon Queen had come for her throne. And now 3 forces stood ready to tear Westeros apart. Black sails covered Blackwater Bay like a dark storm rolling over the sea. The 3-headed dragon banners snapped in the wind, bold and impossible to ignore. Every soldier on the walls of King's Landing could see them. Every man in Tywin's camp froze at the sight. Dragons had returned to Westeros. Inside the Lannister war tent, Tywin Lannister stood very still. His face was calm, but his eyes were calculating faster than ever. "How many ships?" he asked. "Hundreds, my lord," the messenger replied nervously. "And 3 dragons." Even Tywin could not fully hide his reaction to that word. Dragons. Jon, still chained to the wooden post, felt his heart pound. Daenerys Targaryen. The last dragon. He had heard stories, whispers carried across the sea, but none of them truly prepared him for this moment. Tywin looked at Jon again. "It seems," Tywin said slowly, "we both underestimated how quickly the game could change." Jon met his gaze. "You started a war. Now you have 3. Tywin didn't respond. Instead, he gave a sharp order. "Prepare defenses along the coast. Pull half the men back. Leave enough to keep the stag nervous." He turned to leave the tent but paused. "And keep the bastard alive," he added. "He may yet be useful." Outside, chaos had already begun. In King's Landing, Robert Baratheon stood on the battlements, staring at the approaching fleet. The wind blew hard against his armor. Beside him stood Ned Stark and Ser Barristan. "Targaryen," Robert growled. There was old hatred in his voice, old war memories, old ghosts. "She comes while we bleed," Robert said. "Like a vulture." Ned spoke carefully, or like someone reclaiming what she believes is hers. Robert shot him a look, but there was no energy left for argument. Then a scout arrived, breathless. "Your Grace, Jon Snow has been captured, taken by the Lannisters near the river pass." The words hit Robert harder than any blade. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his warhammer slammed against the stone wall so hard it cracked. "Tywin dares," he whispered. But before Robert could give any order, the first dragon roared. The sound shook the sky itself. From the largest ship, Drogon rose like living fire, wings stretching wide enough to shadow the water. The soldiers on the walls stepped back in fear, and then flame fell. Not on the city. On the Lannister siege towers, wood exploded into fire instantly. Men screamed. Horses panicked. The organized lines of Tywin's army broke for the first time. From the shoreline, unsullied soldiers advanced in perfect formation. Daenerys had chosen her first target carefully, Tywin Lannister. In the chaos, Jon's guards abandoned their post to join the fight. The ground shook with dragonfire in the distance. Jon seized the moment. He forced his chains against the wooden post again and again until the old wood cracked. His wrists tore, bleeding, but finally the post split. He grabbed a fallen sword from outside the tent. The battlefield was madness, fire, smoke, screams. Jon cut through distracted soldiers, moving toward the center of the Lannister camp. Ahead, he saw Tywin mounting his horse, shouting orders. Before Jon could reach him, another force crashed into the Lannister flank. Baratheon banners. Robert had opened the gates again. The king rode straight into battle. Fury and desperation mixed together. He saw Jon fighting through the chaos. Their eyes met across the burning field. For a second, everything else faded. Robert roared and charged toward Tywin. Tywin tried to retreat, but dragonfire cut off his escape path. His army was collapsing under attack from three sides: Baratheon, Stark, and Targaryen. This was no longer a war, it was destruction. Robert's warhammer met Tywin's shield with a thunderous crash. The old lion fought bravely, but he was not a frontline warrior like Robert. Steel rang. Fire burned behind them. And with one final crushing swing, Robert's hammer struck true. Tywin Lannister fell. The lion was dead. The Lannister army broke completely after that. Some surrendered, some fled, some burned. Above them the dragons circled like gods judging men. By nightfall the battlefield was silent except for crackling fires. Jon stood exhausted, staring at the fallen lion banner on the ground. Behind him he heard soft footsteps. He turned. Daenerys Targaryen stood only a few feet away, silver hair glowing in the firelight, dragon wings casting shadows behind her. "So," she said calmly, studying him, "you are the bastard the king trusts more than his own blood." Jon swallowed slowly. "And you are the queen who comes with fire." Robert approached, breathing heavy, armor stained with blood. His eyes locked with Daenerys's. For years he had dreamed of killing the last Targaryen. Now she stood before him, powerful, victorious. The realm waited. Robert looked at Jon, then back at Daenerys. Finally he spoke. "Westeros has had enough war." The words shocked everyone. Robert lowered his hammer. "I will not fight another rebellion. Not today." Daenerys studied him carefully. "Then what do you offer?" Robert glanced once more at Jon. A new beginning. The wind carried ash across the battlefield. Three leaders stood in the ruins of war: the stag, the dragon, and the wolf who was neither. And somewhere deep inside history itself, the truth of Jon Snow's bloodline waited, ready to rise. The Game of Thrones had changed forever.